Welcome everyone to another Politics in the Pulpit podcast. My name is Matt Forsyth and I'm your host again for this season as we continue Politics in the Pulpit, brought to you by the Joint Public Issues team. But as always, I'm glad that I'm not alone for these episodes in Politics in the Pulpit because we get to have conversations around election readings coming up and also dive into maybe how they might relate to our modern news and what's happening around the world and maybe more locally to you as well. As I said, I'm not alone in Politics of the Pulpit. I'm delighted I have two guests with me. I'm delighted we have the Reverend Chantal Noppen with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming along to this Politics in the Pulpit. And I think we can nearly say a regular to the Politics in the Pulpit, certainly in this season alone. Simeon Mitchell from the Joint Public Issues team. Welcome back to the podcast, Simeon.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be here again.
Yeah, it's good to see you both, and thank you both for giving up your time to have this conversation, politics in the pulpit. And just a reminder, if you've just come across this little series, this podcast, and thinking, I want to know a little bit more about politics in the pulpit, why not hit subscribe? And that way we can ensure that the next episode will be in your feed wherever you get your podcasts from. But there's lots happening in around the world. Before I come to you, Chantal, to kind of get to know you a little bit more in terms of uh, events and things happening, of course, around the world, of course, globally. We've just recognizing that COP29 has come to an end, and we're going to take some moments, hopefully, in this podcast, reflect a little bit maybe about the impacts of COP29. What are the fallouts? What are the big themes that are coming out from that gathering? But recognizing, of course, there's wider implications that happen around the world, not just from the climate crisis, but also the year of elections. And the year of elections have continued. And of course, over this last weekend just gone, in terms of recording, there's been some broadcasts saying shocking news, interesting news in terms of election results in Romania as well, as there's a new election taking place there. And so this year of elections continues, but also more locally, we're seeing the fallouts of the floods that are happening from across the UK, from the rains and the wind. And I wonder if you listen to this, have you been impacted by that as well? So there's lots happening around the world. But indeed, of course, there's lots for us to reflect on as well. But to do that, let's get to know our guests a little bit more. Chantal, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're obviously a vicar in the Church of England, but I'll let you kind of communicate a little bit more about who you are and what you do day to day as well, most importantly.
Okay. So Chantal is how you say my name. I'm technically not a vicar, actually. I'm a priest in the Church of England. Um, I was a parish priest for over a decade, working in estates in Sunderland and Byker, Newcastle. But I stepped back from that during the last year, and I'm now um, the national coordinator of Inclusive Church.
Brilliant.
That's my day job, and I hold PTO, permission to officiate in the Diocese of Durham. So I help out around my deanery in particular. I live in a pit village on the coast, just above Hartlepool, so in County Durham, and I can see the sea from my house, which is really cool. Um, yeah, so I do lots of different things and bang the drum a lot about inclusion and diversity and equality stuff.
Wonderful, fantastic. And what's the thing, say bang the drum, what's the thing which you're banging hardest about in terms of on that drum, in terms of getting that message, in terms of inclusive church at the moment, do you think for you? What's the thing which is the heartbeat of that movement at the moment for you?
Mm. That's kind of hard because is it the kind of motivation behind what matters to me, or the what I talk about most day to day? And I think I respond to whoever I'm speaking to and what's on their heart, I guess. Um, so I have an openness to all of the areas Inclusive Church specializes in and the topics, but there are some that I have more personal experience of. And I
Mm.
guess personally, if we have like a one track record kind of approach, I've been the women's advocate for the Diocese of Durham for 4 years. So the kind of feminist angle, um, if there's one thing I think would be really helpful to just change, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be smashing the patriarchy. Because I think so much of what the problems are the world are facing in churches, in society, in community, it's around those systems of entitlement and privilege that aren't recognized. And I think the patriarchy is kind of the root of a lot of them, essentially.
I wonder if some of our lecturings might lend itself into some of that conversation as well. So I think that's for us to keep that conversation going. But Simeon, those who have listened to the podcast before know your role in the Joint Public Issues team as team leader, of course, and but for you, you would have been keeping an eye on COP29, of course, and what's happening in Baku. What's kind of your first 30-second thoughts coming off what's been happening at COP29? Have you been trying to watch every moment where you can? Have you kind of, how have you digested COP29, I wonder, and what's your reflections?
Yeah, well, I have colleagues who have been keeping an even closer eye on it than I have, and I learn from their wisdom and their analysis. COP processes are, well, they say that when you're if you want to trust in laws, don't look at how they're made, and if you want to enjoy sausages, don't look at how they're made. And I think COP's a bit like that. If you want to trust that the world is trying to make progress on climate, commitments, don't look at what happens at COPs because the detail of it is some of it is really kind of shockingly poor as kind of processes go. The headline is that an agreement was reached by the end of COP. Well, after the end of COP, but they always go on beyond their scheduled end time. The pressure of the deadline is what gets an agreement in the end. It was an agreement which did commit to more funding, particularly for to support poorer countries with a transition away from fossil fuels and towards low carbon futures. But the majority of those developing nations are saying that it was far too little in terms of financing, and I think we would very much agree with that position that it's too little, too late, inadequate to the task. Which has really been the story of many COPs, that there's been a bit of progress, but it's been far short of what's actually needed when faced with the reality of that of the science of climate change, and once again the kind of that the interests of the powerful and of those with money are trumping the needs of the more vulnerable. Yeah.
Absolutely.
As it
And I
ever
think
was.
progress has been made, but yeah, not quite at the speed and at the um, hoped intention. And I think it's probably to draw maybe some parallel between both your introductory remarks about kind of yourselves and kind of the work you're involved with. I guess there might be some parallel there to be drawn out, isn't there? That there's a hope that there'd be progression and movement towards a goal and aim for things to look how different. But maybe sometimes there's the steps to get there are slower than we hope, maybe. And maybe there's some reflection there for us in our lived experience in different ways in which we come to this podcast, but also actually holding that where people have wanted to see change happen, but sometimes that change doesn't take place at the speed and due to power to name that as an entity that maybe prevents that change to take place. But we'll circle back to some of those things maybe a little bit later on, I think. But we have our lecture readings and, of course, our important dates coming up that we want to continue to be reflected upon for this coming week. Important dates for you to think about in your worshipping communities, whatever it might look like for you. This week we have the first Sunday of Advent. That's critical, of course. And I wonder how you might mark Advent and begin to start that Advent journey. I wonder what that looks like for you. Are you lighting a candle? Are you doing something maybe completely different this Advent? I wonder what that looks like. We have International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women on the 25th of November. That's the day of which we are recording this for complete transparency. But I think it's important for us to ensure that we mark that day, though it'll come after when you often might be preaching these lectionary readings. But I think that's an important marker in the sand to hold as well. International Day of Solidarity with Palestinian peoples, the 29th of November. And of course, the last two dates for us to bring into our minds World AIDS Day on the 1st December, International Day for Abolition of Slavery on the 2nd of December. So there's different dates for us to hold in our thinking when we consider our lectionary readings for this coming Sunday, which are Jeremiah chapter 33, 14 to 16, 1 Thessalonians 3, 9 to 13, and then we go to our New Testament, Luke's Gospel, chapter 21, 25 to 36 and Psalm 25, 1 to 10. So there's a real mixed bag of readings for us to engage with today. But I wonder, what are your opening thoughts when you kind of got these four texts? What were your opening thoughts to consider in terms of, was there particular themes, or kind of what were your what were you first drawn to in your mind when you read these texts?
One of the first things that jumped to my mind when I was looking at the Jeremiah, um, and it's one of those things, when you have a thought and you're like, I'm thinking this, but I don't feel very qualified to think it too deeply, but I need to clock I'm thinking it. It was one of those ones. And it because I was thinking about the troubles that are going on in the Holy Land between Israel and Palestine, and how the passage from Jeremiah is one of those ones that kind of feeds into those sort of things where pe people, Israel, I guess, think they have a right to things because it's been promised by God, and the issues around that kind of entitled sense of, oh, it's fine though because we're allowed to do this. Um, but I'm aware it's a really complex area, and there's so much I don't know or understand about it all. From my perspective, I'm kind of like, but it's never the way of Christ to go down violence and oppression. So if that's what you're doing as a result of what you think God says, then there's an issue there. But I know it's a really complex thing. So yeah, but
There's
for me,
certainly with
Jeremiah,
that some real
yeah,
kind of the text causes us to have those tricky and challenging conversations, but also those meaningful conversations as to, especially when we think of our modern time right now, where what's happening in the world, particularly in that part of the world which you alluded to, it just goes to show actually that the complexities that Scripture sometimes can bring into our focus actually. And I wonder, Simeon, when you read that Jeremiah passage, what was the first thing that you thought of when you read that Jeremiah passage? Did you kind of have it in your mind view, of course, of the conflict that's taking place at the moment in the Middle East, or kind of how did you begin to kind of uh, not say deconstruct that passage, but kind of make sense of it for these modern times?
Mm. Well, I think you can't read scripture, you can't read references to Israel without thinking about what's going on in contemporary Israel. But I think my mind actually went to the kind of promise that is in here. This is really about looking forward rather than kind of so much the contemporary situation. I think that this for me gives a sense of what hope looks like and what a vision of justice might look like. And I was really drawn to the words safety or security, which is in there. And as we look at the impact that conflict has on people and communities, and actually what life has been like in both Israel and the occupied territories for the last 50 years, people have not had safety or security on either side. Um, and what does the future look like? What does our vision look like for that part of the world? Is a place where there is justice for all, for both communities. I hesitate to say both because there's many communities that live alongside each other in that part of the world. But security and safety for all is surely the goal that we should be striving for. Now, that doesn't point to the political solution that will be necessary to get to that point. But it does point to a vision, I think, that we see here as to what that might look like.
I think that's a really helpful
yeah,
kind of reflection as well, because it builds on that idea that actually what we are, as we enter into this Advent season, linking it to the beginning of Advent, people of hope, surely. And actually, we need to be those beacons of hope, be those people that would, in the midst of despair, because that's the context in which Jeremiah is, of course, written in. So let's not forget in that context, though we want to kind of bring it straight into where we are right now in the world. We have to read it in the context there, and that's in the midst of despair and the midst of destruction and exile. And that's really tough and messy. And many of us and many of those that might listen to this, we might experience a certain type of exile, maybe, but we probably don't really truly know what it means to be people of exile and destruction. I dare say. So actually, it's for us to nevertheless, to see the importance of why hope and why the promise is so important and safety is so important to that of the reader when they would have when this passage was written is so encouraging. And as we kind of take that, therefore, theme into Advent, that's a powerful theme. Promise of salvation, promise of hope. I think that's something the world needs just a little bit more slice of that, maybe. I
I
wonder.
think it maps really quite nicely on though to the Thessalonians sense that the thing that really came through to me with the Thessalonians was that sense of community and what
Mm,
it means to see the other and to accept the other and see the good that they have, and that kind of that sense of hope being something that's based on what we want to see and strive for, not necessarily the reality we're in right now. And I thought the way that the Thessalonians brings that sense of, I went down this little rabbit hole, this sense of pride
mm,
in people, because they say pride is bad and it's one of the deadly sins, but I wonder if pride in others is different, and I think that pride in that way comes from love, and that sense of the kind of, if you can love across a divide and across the boundaries and see the worth and the value in those of whom you have difference, everything then is fundamentally altered by that mindset. And I think that's quite a beautiful kind of way of turning the hope around into kind of, hope is real and can change absolutely everything, but it has to be based on the grains of reality that are around us,
yeah.
which we find in people. And it's so easy to see how the world is awful and dreadful and it's all terrible, and like things with the climate change, it's too little too late. Well, why bother? Let's just give up and go home. Well, you can't do that, can you?
Yeah.
Because where would that leave us? It wouldn't leave us anywhere. So yeah, finding that hope, but being rational and realistic with it, and yet still completely radically willing to be led by this kind of ridiculous, generous hope and faith that actually anything's possible with God. So let's believe in the world we want to see. And let's not just expect God to kind of make it so. Let's realize it's on us to do that. That's what it means to be in community. We don't exist in isolation. The things that we do have impact on others.
Mm,
And I think it's very easy to underestimate our impact on others. But actually, we each have the possibility to change the world that we operate in.
yeah. Absolutely.
I think
I want just
if we look at
you go,
the
Simeon.
readings as a sorry, if we think look at the readings as a kind of package, I guess if Jeremiah is the kind of the big picture, that the vision, the hope that we hold on to, that promise for the future. I would see the Thessalonians and the Luke that we'll come on to talk about being about kind of how do we then live now,
Mm,
in the light of the fact that we are in this world which has got all this stuff going on, which is dark and depressing and it feels like the end the end is coming and not in a way that we would want. How then do we live now? I think the Thessalonians passage is such a comforting set of words to hear. And just as a slight aside, I was at an event last week where we were talking about how people read scripture in church, and this is definitely one to read with a smile on your face, isn't it? Because the warmth of it then will come through. You can't read it soberly, but how can we thank God enough for you in return for all the joy that we feel before our God because of you? And the warmth in this and the love which is evident in the way the words are put together as well as what is being said, I think is so strong, and would that any of us would be a source of such joy and such thankfulness for others. um, and that is simple, I suppose, encouragement to pray for one another and to abound in love for one another is a way to live, is a lifestyle for these end times, I guess, and a lifestyle of hope, because it creates that community, as you were saying, Chantal, which is the starting
Lifestyle
point
of
for
hope. That's a great line. I
yeah.
love that. Lifestyle of hope. I'm going to store that one up. I like it.
And I wonder, so building on the lifestyle of hope, then, how And Chantal, for you, how have you seen that in the spaces where you are and where you exhibit kind of ministry right now, especially with inclusive gatherings? Where do you see that play out? Because you talked about valuing the other, valuing those others that come into the space in terms of where do you see love overflowing, I guess, to put it into that Thessalonians language and the impact it has, most importantly. Can you kind of speak to that? Have you experienced that of people receiving that love that overflows and that acceptance, and what's been the impact in the context in which you minister?
So I've been really struck recently. So I've held PTO for since about June, and which means I go to churches that aren't my own
Mhm.
quite often now. And it's been it's really easy to feel a bit depressed about the state of the church. And we're constantly told all these depressing down stats about decline and all of this. But the churches I've been going to, they're majority really quite small, little pit villages. Um, and there's a lot that's happened to those communities and in those communities that would justifiably make people a bit kind of sad, dejected, frustrated, feeling abandoned by the government, all that kind of stuff. But on the ground, in those churches, they're real people living faithful lives. And I I go and I preach about inclusion and I preach about change, knowing that change is really hard and painful and scary and difficult. But actually, when it's a choice that you're doing yourself, when it's not done to you, we know that we need change to grow. Like you cannot not change if you're growing, and that kind of sense of the learning journey never finishing. And my son asked me yesterday, "When will I know everything, Mama? When will I be done my learning?" And I was like, "Mate, uh, never. Like you're always learning." And I think when we kind of refuse that to be our truth, that's when we kind of stale and we stop loving and we stop living in a hopeful kind of way for others. But because we're not meant to stay static, we're meant to constantly be listening and learning to the world around us, to the little insights and how our perspective changes as we know more, we learn more about all these issues, inclusion issues, climate issues, all of these things, then the imperative is on us to then act differently. Like I think it's easy to kind of beat yourself up for stuff you've done wrong. Or, I look back at my life when I was younger and go, oh my word, I'm glad I didn't really know me. Oh, wait, I did. I was there. You can't change the past, but you can build for a better future. And that kind of, it's really exciting when you meet just normal people who think that they're not important and that their opinion doesn't matter and they're forgotten. And then you see the way they love and you see and hear the stories of the things that they have come to value, that if they'd been asked, how would you feel if someone with X came into your church and changed things? They'd be like, "Wah." But actually, as soon as it becomes about people and it's someone in their village
Mm.
coming and doing this thing or saying this thing or being that way, the ability for just normal people to love and to love through that and to change because of the people they encounter is so exciting. And that's where I think things like inclusive church really matter, because they're not just concepts. They're not just, wouldn't it be nice if we were all just a bit nicer to each other? It's not about tick box exercise of having diversity represented. It's that this matters because people matter, because every individual is made and loved by God, and we are all fundamentally different. Thank God. I mean, if the world was all made of me, it would be a nightmare. I absolutely see that. And so it's that kind of learning to see the imago Dei in each person, the way they've been made, with their differences, with the different interests, with the different skills, with their different flaws, and find the beauty within that. And we are all called to try and be more Christ-like in our living and in our doing and get like in tune with that sense. And I just think it's so exciting when people understand that the reason these things matter is because they're people, and
Yeah.
people matter, and people are who we are. And that, again, it comes back to that sense of community and that kind of being able to love, really, because love is the point of it all.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah.
To quote someone, love wins. It's often it's often been said sometimes before as well, and there's something about seeing the humanity in all of it, isn't it? In being able to, and I think that's what cuts through a lot of these kind of passages, as you said, Simeon, is about the Thessalonians and the Luke's gospel kind of calls us into what it means to be human, what it means to act as human, and calls us, therefore, I think at this time, given the context in which these passages come to us in the lecture readings, well in Advent season of how will we enter Advent with that spirit of love and generosity and of care and of faithfulness and prayerfulness. And I think there's a challenge there for us as we begin Advent to kind of start as we mean to go on in Advent. I think there's a real Advent actually, though it will sometimes feel like it'll go quick. Actually, it's a good amount of time. And you can begin to set habits and routines and change things in that Advent season, in that period of waiting. That's what Advent is about. It's that period of waiting. We're waiting for the Messiah to come. And so uh, to bring that to a question, I guess, Simeon, is kind of now, how would you kind of then draw upon some of that challenge in the Luke's Gospel in Thessalonians? If you were preaching this Sunday, I don't know if you are preaching this Sunday or if you got a Sunday off, but how would you kind of want to kind of tackle this in terms of a sermon, in terms of preaching? Would you want to be going down that challenge route or just that warmth and encouragement? Where would you kind of want to land it?
Yeah, I think I would always try and combine challenge with warmth and encouragement. 'Cause actually, I think one is really hard you don't get the full picture if you just focus on one of those two things.
Absolutely.
Because I think that is what the gospel is both challenge and encouragement, isn't it? I'm not preaching on Sunday, but if I were, I think I would probably be wanting to reflect more deeply on how we respond to the climate crisis,
Mm,
particularly because this COP has been in our headlines and because we need to regularly engage with this as Christians, as churches living in a time of climate emergency. And I think the Luke passage in particular is really sort of helpful around this. We've got this parable of the fig tree and essentially Jesus encouraging people to read the signs of the times. And as we look around and we read the signs of the times in our world, and we look at the news headlines about flooding across the UK, and here I live in Oxford, and we've got floods on the local roads. The local WhatsApp group was full this morning of, can I get through that road this morning? We've got global witnesses, farmers in developing countries, to the way the climate is impacting on them. We've got Pacific Islanders having to relocate to higher ground. We've got the scientists telling us, and can we not read the signs of the times about what is going on here? And I think we are in danger of being like those that Jesus is talking to, who willfully ignore the signs of the times when it comes to the kind of ecological destruction that we are participating in. And as we enter that season of, yes, it is Advent and it's a time for sober reflection and for holding on to hope. But also for many of us, it's a time of busy activity as we prepare for the season of overindulgence. That is the way that we celebrate Christmas. And I'm not immune from that at all. But just as we think about all the consumption that is going to be going on in our world, in our country, in our homes over the next few weeks as well, we might hold to, I guess, the messages at the end of the Luke passage about, which are really practical about what people should be doing as they read the signs of the times. Be alert or be on guard is the first thing. Like, are we engaging with this stuff, or are we inclined to push it off? I know that there are days when I turn off the news, when I don't scroll along my news feed, because it just all seems so depressing. But actually, the call is to engagement, isn't it? To being alert to what is going on, what's really going on in our world, in our country, and in people's lives.
mm,
And then to turn away from destructive habits, if you like. I had to look up what dissipation meant because I wasn't immediately clear to me what dissipation meant. But this is about overindulgence in sensory pleasures. And again, that's a good link to the season of Christmas and the way it's celebrated often. Um, and move away from drunkenness, again, a common feature of people's celebrations, but also of despair, of worry. These are the things that Jesus is saying we should be distancing ourselves from, um, because we're called into this new way of being alert at all times, praying for strength, and I guess praying for the courage to change, which Chantal was talking about in her context as well. Change is really difficult to do, but actually that is what we are called to do. And if we're going to have any chance of addressing the climate crisis, then we all will need to change.
Yeah. It's a personal responsibility, isn't there, in all these texts? So coming out of Thessalonians, that if because of the love we first received from God, let that overflow. But that should be the thing which then intentionally ensures that we begin to change the way in which we act and be alert to it and be yeah, not sleepwalking into this Advent season. Be very consciously aware of the decisions that we're making, how we are thinking of the other, thinking of those that are beside us, near us, both afar and near. How do we be intentional about some of those actions? And ultimately, not get swept up with the season of goodwill and good cheer. Of course, we want to find joy in those moments, but actually, how do we stay faithful to what we're being encouraged and called to do at this season of time, at this point in our world too? So, thinking as a whole, kind of as we begin to kind of wrap up kind of these lectionary readings, of course, we've got our psalm too. Is there anything that stands out from the psalm for you? Is there kind of any nuggets within that? Because sometimes, the psalm can kind of get pushed to the side, maybe. But is there any kind of nuggets for you that you thought, oh, that we really don't want to miss that piece in the psalm today?
So the thing that really jumped out to me with the psalm was how it connects to World AIDS Day and the White
Mm,
Ribbon Day in particular, because what leapt out to me was the "Let me nevermore be put to shame," and
mm,
that sense of how destructive shame is, and how often the church has brought shame on people for things they've decided are bad. Um, and looking at, like, for example, the LGBT community, and that kind of thinking about the AIDS um pandemic, it was pandemic, wasn't it? I get a bit confused with those two things. And that kind of the way I think that shame is put on people in completely unfair, inappropriate ways. And it's not that I think we need to get rid of the concept of sin. That's not what I'm saying. But I think the church has historically switched its sense of moral right and wrong into this kind of the things that we think are wrong, we are now going to lay all this shame on people. And that's so damaging. It's so destructive and 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 goes against the idea of a lifestyle of hope. And yeah, it really, because I was thinking about White Ribbon Day and that the control of being under the oppression of others, um, be it during conflicts or be it living in an abusive relationship and not realizing necessarily that that's what you're in, but you're kept in it because of the way that your feelings and self is manipulated by the people in power, the people who are making you feel ashamed for daring to question. Um, yeah, I think questions are often of God, though.
and it goes back to your point about the patriarchy, earlier on, that actually so often it's the abuse of power, isn't it? I think we lament and we have to hold the space as well, and I think it's really important for both, as I said at the beginning, given when it sits on 25th of November, we're really in danger potentially. International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. We're in danger of just allowing that to slip through the net potentially, and I'm really aware of that given the date that it is this year. And so actually, it's really important for us to be able to ensure that that space is held and that space is spoken about as well, and to name. The challenges both within our society but also wider societies too. And I think lastly, there's a real safeguarding aspect to it too, to do that well, because recognizing that you mentioned, of course, in your experience of going to maybe smaller chapels and places of worship, and so often we don't realize potentially that which people might have experienced some time ago in their past, and the trauma in which they've held on to. And I think it's really important for us as we mark these days, mark these moments, to allow conversation, that we do provide that safe space for people to have those moments. But to do that well, you need to do the planning and do to be intentional about how you create a safer environment. So I put that challenge out to you as a listener. What does that safe environment look like in your context? Where does that need to be? What does that need to look like? And how does that need to operate? And to do that well, we've spoken about going into Advent intentionally. And I think marking these days with intention as well has power in a positive way to make an impact, I hope, as well. Simeon, anything from you in terms of the psalm, building on kind of what you just heard there about from Chantal and from myself, anything from you that stands out from the psalm, or kind of last reflections overall?
Well, the a kind of counterpoint to the line about let those who wait for you not be put to shame is and let those who are wantonly treacherous be ashamed. And I guess there's the counterpoint is, we seek justice in this. We don't just seek to comfort the victims of violence or suffering, but we seek also to see perpetrators and abusers brought to justice. And I guess we wouldn't want to let that drop from that moment either. The line from the psalm that leapt out at me before, as I was reading it first time, was about humility. Towards the end, he leads the humble in what is right and teaches the humble his way. And I guess that really sits alongside the other things we've been saying about how the posture with which we come into Advent, if we come into Advent with a sense of humility and of trusting in God, and of abounding in love for one another, that's a good way to live, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it's on that note we can begin to round up today's Politics in the Pulpit. I'm grateful for my guests today and grateful both of you for sharing. And I wonder, Chantal, in terms of those listening to you, hearing you speak and hear about your role in the life of the church, if they want to kind of hear more about what you're up to, is there anywhere they can go and follow, or anything they can read? Like what sort of things they can get involved with if they're in interested in inclusive church or other areas as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff. We have a website, as everyone does, inclusive-church. It's just a shame it couldn't just be one word, but .org is our website, and there's loads of information there on the different areas that we. So we're an educational charity, so we're around to try and support and equip churches and individuals on their kind of journey towards inclusion, because it's not a kind of one-time thing. You get it right,
Mm.
now it's done. But we've got a very new resource that's still coming out. There, we've done a series of little videos, 7 of them, called Make Room at the Inn,
Mm.
and they're on YouTube if you want to look up Inclusive Church, Make Room, and they're looking at the little changes that the idea is that any church, any individual who's responsible for leading any kind of community, there would be something in there that they could do. No matter how inclusive they think they are, there's always more we can do. And sometimes really little things get overlooked
Mm.
that could make a massive difference. So that started coming out last week. I'm releasing them in little bits. I think the final one comes out tomorrow. And the idea is that, yeah, you can look at those and go, oh, actually, we haven't done that. That would be really, that's a quick win. That's easy. Because the big things matter too. But sometimes just being able to, you know, put a signpost up. Actually, yeah, maybe we could do that. That would change things, and it's not going to cost us anything, but it might be really worth it, because when is it not worth increasing the love that people can experience and be shown, and the welcome being broadened? When is it not worth that? I can't think of the time. So,
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, we'll make sure we put the links that you just said there as well in the podcast descriptor below as well. So wherever you get your podcast from, you look at the descriptor of this podcast, you'll find those links too, and do go and watch those videos too, and allow that bit of overflow, that love that we've been talking about in that Thessalonians to maybe draw you to a piece of action, a bit of doing, a bit of change this Advent season as well. And Simeon, I'm sure if people had COP29 on their bingo cards, they would have been doing pretty well today. But is there any kind of last reflections from you from Joint Public Issues team that you'd want to kind of just flag for us to be aware of? Because I know there was a number of resources that were being produced during COP29, but kind of coming off the back of it, is there things that we should be expecting to see, or other areas this Advent that JPIT team are kind of wanting to draw people's attention to? I wonder.
Well, I would encourage people to go to the JPIT website, jpit.uk /COP29 to read. We've had a series of blogs through COP, and that's where you'll also find an analysis that's a little bit more thorough than mine about the outcomes of COP and what that means and where we might go next with it. But also resources are there around how you might engage in your church in conversations about climate, and resources like Eco Church and Eco Congregation, which are also really helpful for that.
Wonderful. As always, we'll make sure that is in the podcast script as well. Thank you to both of you for joining me for Politics in the Pulpit. It's been a pleasure to have you both in this conversation. I wish you both a very happy and joyful Advent season as well. And to you, listeners, as well, as you listen to Politics in the Pulpit, why not give us a subscribe if you've not done so already, or head over to our YouTube channel where you can watch us live and in living colour, and you can see this conversation take place as well, and future conversations too. Over in Politics in the Pulpit on the Joint Public Issues Team YouTube channel. So give that a like while you're there, and you'll get all the notifications of future episodes that will be coming up in the very near future. But take care. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you all next week. Bye for now.